Welcome, Bibek. I find it very coincidental that all the people who engage with economics, finance, are the same people who deal with scriptures, who deal with spirituality. And somehow we need to discover this link between economics and spirituality. Welcome to this session. I'll start immediately. What is spirituality? People often confuse religiosity with spirituality. When they say, my spirit weeps, your spirit doesn't weep, your heart weeps. So I think there is some error that we make in the general narratives outside, where spirituality is seen to be not what it is in the Indian tradition, but more of religiosity.
Thank you, Gautam. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And namaste, everyone. I think part of the problem is that when we discuss things like these, we often use Western notions and Western terms. And that's also true of words like spirituality and religion. Both of these are words in English. Religion etymologically carries with it a connotation of rules, dogma, and ism. I prefer the word dharma, which is much more significant. Iha dharvate saha dharma. Anything that holds up is dharma. Anything that holds you up as an individual is dharma. Anything that holds up society is dharma. Anything that the government or the king does is raja dharma. So dharma is, in my view, a much better word than religion. Exactly similarly, instead of spirituality, I would prefer use of the word Adhyathma, which really brings us to the core question that all of us should ask. Who am I? And looked at in that sense, there is absolutely no difference between Adhyatma and Dharma, because the pursuit of Adhyatma, the pursuit of that inward-looking knowledge, is no different from certain varieties of Dharma.
Okay, so which means that we may possibly need to vocabularize Adhyatma and Dharma. Dharma we have failed to do so for several years, and religion has taken its place. Adhyatma, we can make an attempt today so that spirituality does not dilute it. When we come to religion, in the Indian tradition again, there is a huge weight given to rituals. At what point does a physical ritual become a spiritual giving, engagement, or a spiritual or an adhyatmik? When does ritual become adhyatmik?
You've not asked this question, but let me again mention this because we are on matters of vocabulary and jargon. I dislike the use of the word Hinduism, although the word is used a lot, because ism to me again suggests dogma. Capitalism, socialism, Marxism, Leninism, communism, ism. The right word, which often is maligned, is actually Hindutva, because the root word tva, tva, carries in Sanskrit the nuance of the truth. I go back to this question of who am I? And while on vocabulary, let me quickly mention a very important point. all of our languages in differing degrees, and I'm qualifying by using the expression differing degrees in a state like this one, have some relationship with Sanskrit. So I will use Sanskrit as an example, but it applies to all Indian languages. If I ask you, who are you? Because of our exposure to the West, we will often say, I am Gautam. Or I will often say, I am Bibek. But that's not our natural way of expression. Our natural way of expression is, I am known as Gautam. My name is Gautam. The point I am making is, in all of our language systems, it is the verb that is important. The noun, the proper name, the pronoun is secondary in importance. And this, I think, has a bearing on the way we look at the world. Language shapes discourse, language shapes attitudes. It is natural in our societies for the aham, for the ego, to be at the back. Now, going back to your question, when I ask the question of who am I, then sometimes it becomes necessary to have tools. The tools are just a means towards that end of realization. The tools are not an end in itself. Mantra is anything that controls the mind. Yantra is anything that restrains in general. Tantra is anything that controls and restrains the body. So all of these are tools. The rituals are also tools, and we should not mistake the means from the end. So when I fast on, let us say, Tuesday, there is nothing particularly sacrosanct about fasting on Tuesday or on any particular parva. It is to remind us that we should be restrained in our diet. We should not be excessive in terms of what we eat and what we drink. The rituals that you mentioned are also exactly like that. They are a reminder of restraint.
So then we are looking at rituals in the outer manifested physical body. I am asking the question, at some point, every ritual is a journey to the self, to the soul, to the spirit. At what point does a physical restraint, let's talk about fasting for instance, become an oblation, a sacrifice not in the Western sense, but a self-giving into a higher spiritual, it need not even be higher, into a spiritual domain?
Well, let me respond to this in an indirect kind of way. That all of us are at different levels of elevation in our internal awakening. And because all of us are at different levels in that internal search, each one of us has to find our individual tools. What may be appropriate for you may not be appropriate for me. Which is the reason, though there are important texts in Hinduism, there is no single book. There isn't meant to be. So the rituals, the extent to which the rituals are important is completely a function of what kind of individual you are. There are people who are within the fold of broader Hinduism who have completely dispensed with rituals. They do not believe in rituals. But what I think is important is when we do a ritual, it is important to understand why are we doing it. For example, many of us will recite a mantra. At the end of the mantra, we will say, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Why do we say it 3 times? Why don't we say it 5 times? Why don't we say it 13 times? Many of us mechanically do it without asking the question. The simple point I'm making is, if we do not ask these questions, if we do not understand why we are doing these rituals, then we are making a fetish out of it. When we go to a temple and we do a pradakshina, it is important to understand why we are doing that pradakshina. When we are giving that naivedya, it is important to understand why we are giving that naivedya. Otherwise, the rituals and the rules become a fetish.
You mentioned that India doesn't have, or Sanatan Dharma doesn't have a single book. We have several books. I would say we don't even have a single philosophy. There is yoga, there is Sankhya, there is Mimamsa. And there is some sort of an open source mechanism available to any individual who, according to his or her proclivity, can engage with and reach several paths towards spirituality. If that is the case, how do we call a group of people, a group of followers, how do we ascribe, to use the word that you don't like very much, Hinduism? I don't like it either. But what is then Hinduism? What is Sanatan Dharma? Is it a conglomeration of several philosophies? Is it a conglomeration of the Puranas, of the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, Vedas? Can it be even captured into an idea? Who are we?
The end goal of all of these different paths is always the same. The end goal. It's just that the paths are different. For example, in very facile discussions of the Bhagavad Gita, people will say, there are 3 different paths. There is Jnana Yoga, there is Karma Yoga, and there is Bhakti Yoga. As if these are 3 different paths. These are not 3 different paths. They are all connected to each other. You as Gautam, you have a body. You as Gautam, you have a heart. You as Gautam have a mind. It's not that Gautam functions with only one and not the others. So when you function with the heart, that is Bhakti Yoga. When you function with the mind, that is Jnana Yoga. When you function with the body, that is Karma Yoga. Now, so far as Hinduism is concerned, regardless of the 6 darshanas, and there are many more actually variations of the 6 darshanas, and darshana in my view is a far better word to use than philosophy. There are certain core tenets, and if you believe in these core tenets, you fall within that broad template of Hinduism. 1, I believe in an Atman, and I believe that Atman is not the same as the physical body. I believe that when the physical body dies, that Atman does not die. And therefore, I believe in Punarjanma or reincarnation. If I subscribe to these principles, the ones I've just outlined, then, very broadly, I am under the umbrella of Hinduism.
Let's take Sankhya, which has 25 characteristics. It does not tell you to do anything. It just explains who you are, how you are contextualized within the broader principles of the spirit body, what your traits are. And yet, It's a complete school of thought through which you can attain or reach wherever you wish to.
You see, over a period of time, out of the 6 darshanas, 3 of them have just become assimilated and they have generally gone away in some sense. The 3 that remain are Sankhya and Yoga, which have more or less become unified over a period of time. And of course, there is Vedanta. You mentioned the 25, 26 principles of Sankhya. But people who are devotees of Shiva will believe in 36 tattvas, which is slightly different from Sankhya's 25 or 26. So let me give you a different example. Suppose there is a glass of water and I am talking about the concept of sweetness. So if I'm talking about the concept of sweetness, the concept of sweetness is a very abstract concept. I tell you, Gautam, this is the nature of sweetness. You will say, what on earth is sweetness? I don't understand. Now, to use this forced simile, sweetness is a bit like Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta. The moment I come to you and say, Gautam, look, here is this glass of water, it's fresh lime, it's soda, and it's sweet. Now you will say, I've got some understanding of what sweet is. If instead of that fresh lime with soda sweet, I give you a lump of sugar, you will say, now I understand what is sweet. So in any process, the message also depends on the receptivity of the receiver. So although the eventual goal of all yoga is unification between the Jivatman and the Paramatman, the paths that each one of us takes may necessarily be different, and the kind of success we achieve in this life will also differ because we are at different levels. Hence, there are different paths. And all of these different texts are different indicators. The reason there used to be a Guru Shishya Parampara is someone comes to me and says, will you recommend a textbook on economics? I will say, wait a minute, I will recommend a textbook on economics to you, but how much of economics have you studied? And depending on how much the student knows, I will recommend a text. So the guru does exactly that. The right guru does exactly that. The right guru identifies to what level you have ascended up that awareness ladder and determines what is best for you, which is why Adi Shankaracharya was one of the best teachers conceivable. For the ordinary person, there were the stotras. For the really advanced person, there was the Shankar Bhashya. And that's precisely the reason why we do not have a single book.
Yeah, it reminds me of the question you asked in your previous interview, which book of Sri Aurobindo should I read? And there is no single answer. The book that I would advise you to read would be different from the book that I would advise somebody else to. Okay, let me change this, the discussion slightly differently, in a different direction. I've been noticing right from the time, right from college, that whichever new writing that happens on Indian spirituality is constantly seeking a certificate of validation from science. The science of breath, the science of consciousness. Science, it is a scientific procedure. While when I look at the spiritual principles, yoga, Sankhya, in their own abstract, in their own knowledge, within their own knowledge systems, I find it equally logical, equally citable. There are the question of citations, everything is there. Why are we in 21st century India, when the West or the Western philosophies are coming here to learn spirituality, going back to say this is scientific. Why are we seeking the certificate of science?
What is science? Science, by its very nature, is about knowledge. It's about jnana, it's about vijnana. Those words are used synonymously, but there's an important difference between the two, which we will come to if we have time. But science is inherently empirical. I test something and I come to an answer. Quite often our perceptions of science are very, very Newtonian, as if science is certain. That old world of Newtonian certainty is over and done with. Science is essentially probabilistic. Science is never able to prove something, science is able to disprove something. Nonetheless, science is inherently empirical. All our texts are inherently empirical, which is the reason you don't have a single text. Many of us these days are conscious of our physical well-being. Have I taken 10,000 steps a day? Have I taken 20,000 steps? Have I done a workout for half an hour? What is my BMI? If we spend that half an hour in the pursuit of Adhyathmik, internally you will see the difference, and it is empirical. So all our texts are essentially very scientific in their belief. No rishi ever said, this is the truth. Every rishi says, this is what I have felt, Vedaha Metam. This does not necessarily mean that for everyone this is the answer. So just as if for 3 months you do that 10,000 steps a day, you will see an improvement in your lipid profiles, your HDL will come down, your HDL will go up, your VLDL will come down, your LDL will come down. If we spend half an hour on this internal process, each one of us, depending on how seriously we are following that regimen, will see the difference at the end of 3 months. Now that is a general point about our texts, our approach to Dharma being very scientific. On a broader point, it is not just in this context. Unfortunately, we always seek validation from the West, irrespective of the subject. So this is not about whether I can produce Krishna's Aadhaar card or not, or birth certificate. It's not about that. Irrespective of the domain, we seek validation from the West before, and this has to do maybe with our colonial heritage, which we still haven't got over, but this is not specific to what we are talking about. It's a general Malay.
Okay, a controversial and highly politicized aspect of what is known as Hinduism is the caste system. Caste, as we know it, is not part of Hinduism. It has been corrupted from what is the Varna system. The Varna system in its essence is not a birth-led system. It is a characteristics-led system. In the 21st century, in 2022, today, I feel myself, and I think everybody does here, that at some point, I'm a Brahman as a creator of knowledge. At another point, I feel I'm a Vaishya in terms of managing money. At a third point, I feel I'm a Shudra because I serve an organization. I find myself as an admixture of several. I'm not yet a Kshatriya. I don't fight. But the other 3 Varnas are inside me as far as the spirituality, the spiritual characteristics of that Varna go. Does it even apply today, the caste system?
I wish again, going back to what I said about language, wish we did not use expressions like caste, which, if I know correctly, has its root in Portuguese. There are different words. There is varna, there is jati, and there is the dharma of kulas. When the first proper census was introduced in British India in 1871, and if you look up the records, when the British asked questions about the four varnas and asked people, are you a Brahmana, are you a Kshatriya, are you a Vaishya, or are you a Shudra? Many people were completely confused, except for the Brahmanas and to a certain extent the Shudras in between. Sometimes people did not know what the answer was. You used the expression Sanatan Dharma earlier. In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna says, Utsyadante jati dharma kula dharmascha shashvata. So there is a dharma of jatis. There was a dharma of kulas, of the family. So in any event, this notion that everything fitted into the four varna structure is very, very artificial. According to the Smriti texts, there were certain things Brahmanas were supposed to do. There were certain things Kshatriyas were supposed to do. There were certain things Vaishyas were supposed to do. There were certain things Shudras were supposed to do. Amongst the various things that Brahmanas could eat was fish. Manusriti. Brahmanas could eat fish, not fish at random, but they could eat the rohita fish, rohu. Question: who caught the fish? Catching fish was not one of the permissible duties of Brahmanas. It was not one of the permissible tasks for Kshatriyas. It was not one of the permissible tasks for Vaishyas. It was not one of the permissible tasks for Shudras. And the answer, of course, is they were dhivaras, fishermen, who are not Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas or Shudras. Satyavati of the Mahabharata was descended from such a family. So the four varna structure is an artificial construct in any event. It did not exist in such a simplified, stratified sense. It does not exist. This country of ours, Bharatvarsha, is named, as everyone here knows, after King Bharat. Before King Bharat, what was this land called? And I'd be very surprised if too many people in this audience knew the answer. It was named after King Nabhag. And why am I mentioning Nabhag? Because one of Nabhag's sons became a Kshatriya, one became a Brahmana, and one became a Shudra. In other words, as you said, Varna, when it initially started, assuming that fourfold structure, it was based on functional classification. Chatur varnang maya srishtang guna karma vibhagasha. Depending on my inclinations, my professions, my proclivities, I became a Brahmana. Who is a Brahmana? The best definition of a Brahmana is in the Yaksha Prashna section of the Mahabharata, when the Yaksha asks Yudhishthira this. And the Brahmana is really the ideal human being. That's what a Brahmana is. If you think of the evolution, and I'm deliberately using the word evolution, of the 10 Vishnu Avatars, the first four are obvious: Matsya, Kurma, Varaha, Narasingha. It represents natural evolution. That's obvious. But think of it thereafter. Vamana, half a man. Parashuram born a Brahmana, but he was not a Brahmana in practice. Then we have Krishna oblique Balaram sometimes. We have Rama, of course. None of them is a Brahmana. The first Brahmana, the Shavatar, is going to be Kalki. So Brahmana is an ideal human. That's what a Brahmana is. Now don't get me wrong. Chaturvarnang maya shishtang guna karma vibhagasha. It was functional classification, but yes, over a period of time, it became hereditary and brought with it much of the oppression. So don't get me wrong, I am not denying that there was a lot of oppression, there was a lot of subjugation in the name of caste, but that happened subsequently, not the way the Varna system originally started.
Even in the Mahabharata, there is a butcher who gives knowledge to a Brahmana.
Of course.
There is a housewife whose only dharma is to serve her husband, and she makes him wait outside despite having immense powers of her own. So I think overall, even in our literature, in our epics, we have several conversations where this birth-driven Varna is not...
on this, let me bring in an additional point. That most of the time, when asked about texts on Hinduism, particularly in the West, people will mention texts on Vedanta. People will mention Upanishad, Aranyaks. Historically, not today, historically there were 4 ashramas, not just 4 varnas. There was Brahmacharya, Garhastha, Vanaprastha and Sannyas. The question to ask is, who composed Vedanta? Who composed the Upanishads? These were people who were in Vanaprastha and people who were in Sannyas. In any society, then as well as now, how many people resort to Vanaprastha and Sannyas and strive for moksha dharma? Amongst crores of people, very few will be able to achieve moksha of being liberated from samsara, this wheel of worldly existence. The rest of us are in the ashrama of householders or garhasthas. The Mahabharata, depending on how you count, has more than 20 Gitas. Bhagavad Gita is not the only one. And I am glad you mentioned the Veda Gita, because the Veda Gita is one of the Gitas in the Mahabharata which is most applicable for householders.
I will open it out in case you have questions. Just frame the question in your mind, identify yourself, and then ask the question. In the meantime, you have translated the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, you have begun on the Puranic journey now. Tell us one book that you would like us to read.
I think it depends on the person. You see, look, what I am translating is unabridged versions. Unabridged versions take patience to translate and they take patience to read. The unabridged version of the Mahabharata that I have done has 10 volumes. It runs into something like 2.5 million words. So if someone were to want, I presume you're talking about my translation.
That's right, that's right.
If it is my translations, I would suggest that one should read the Valmiki Ramayana because it is simpler, because it is shorter, primarily those reasons. Or alternatively, the Markandeya Puran, particularly that particular section of the Markandeya Puran, several of us are aware of without necessarily knowing that it comes from the Markandeya Puran. That is the section on Devi, which sometimes we know in the eastern parts of the country as Chandi, and sometimes we know in the northern parts of the country as Durga Saptashati.
It is the most gripping chapters, those few chapters that I've read, there is technological disruption happening. There is pandemic disruption happening. Now there is geopolitical disruption happening. Disruption has become a way of life. It's the new normal. Do you see the rise of an apada dharma within Raja Dharma? And if so, what are the 2 or 3 principles with which to deal with it, to live with it?
Before I answer that question, Gautam, science is, as I said, every scientist is uncertain about what happens. Science is inherently probabilistic. No scientist will ever say, I know. Unfortunately, technology brings with it arrogance. There is a great deal of arrogance that we as human species have developed as a result of technology. We have learned to control birth. We have learned to control death. This arrogance is about things that are external. So as human species, we have evolved, but we have evolved in terms of things that are external. External objects, external power, power over nature, all of these is external. But we began with Adhyathma. Adhyathma is about what is internal. On that internal path of evolution, I don't think as a species, individuals may be different, I don't think as a species we have moved significantly. In fact, we have probably regressed individually. And I think one of the reasons for that is language. Now, what do I mean by that? That's a very loaded statement. Fire brought a lot of discovery of fire, brought a lot of good things, but it inherently can also damage. Exactly similarly, language brought a lot of good things, but it also damaged. Because we are perpetually talking. We are talking all the time. WhatsApp, social media, even more so thanks to technology. Whereas the search for Adhyatma requires internal reflection, it requires quietness, it requires solitude. One of the words for sages was Muni, as there's Rishi also, but Muni. Muni has the same etymological root as Mona, meaning silence. So for that internal evolution, we need that silence. And I am certain each one of us in our busy schedules can carve out that half an hour of silence and internal reflection. Now, Apadharma is a section, as a section only exists in the Mahabharata, in the Shanti Parva, when there is a Raja Dharma and there is an Apadharma, which is the Dharma in terms of calamities. All it means is there was a template of Dharma, a general template of Dharma for Brahmana, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Shudras, for kings, whatever. In terms of a calamity, you were allowed to deviate from that template.
And we have seen that those deviations happen in this calamities. Yes, sir, your question.
Yes, sir, I have 2 short questions for you. The first question is, when you say that the Varna system was initially based on profession and not by birth, was there any bit of superiority or inferiority between the Brahmins who are the ideal men and the Shudras who do other jobs? That's my first question. The second question is, when you said that during the 1871 census, which was the first in India, during the census of 1871, the people were... Am I audible, sir? Yeah.
Yes, you are. Please carry on.
During the census of 1871, when you said that the people were initially confused as to what their caste are, do you mean to say that the caste as an institution of oppression took shape only after the first census of 1871?
I did not say that. I did not say that at all. Don't put words in my mouth.
No, I'm trying to understand. Sir,
I said.
Thank you. You may take the mic, please.
I said that in most parts of India, if you ask people, in many parts of India, if you ask people, what is your jati? You will get an answer. If you ask, what is your varna? There are parts of India, in some segments, where you will not get a very clear answer. Now, because of SC/ST reservations, it may be different, Brahmanas are different, but in many parts, the answer will be in terms of jatis as opposed to varnas. I repeat, the oppression in the name of varna, particularly on the part of Brahmanas, started much earlier. I was just making the point that the 1871 census established that a simplified description of India in terms of 4 varnas is very, very misleading, and it simplifies. What was the other?
I don't know.
This is the danger with short questions.
Yeah.
The answers tend to be long, but just...
Can you bring the mic to this person?
No, I should answer the other question.
What was the... yeah, whether there was any superiority within the caste, within the varnas.
No, I gave you this example earlier. By the way, all the Itihas and Purana texts say that there are no Brahmanas in Kali Yuga because Dharma declines. As I said, until a certain point in time, it was not hereditary. And there were people, I gave the example of Navhag's children, they changed Varnas. Superiority in what sense? It would depend on how you define superiority. Because the wealth was created by Vaishyas. And it was the wealth of Vaishyas that sustained Brahmanas and even Kshatriyas. So if it is measured in terms of an yardstick of wealth creation, then clearly the Vaishyas were superior. I would hate to use the word superior. Brahmana, in many texts, was an ideal human being who was closer in terms of realization of that Adhyathma. And I repeat, this has nothing to do with birth, or had nothing to do with birth.
So both yesterday and today, we heard the usage of the word or. Yesterday in Shashi Tharoor's talk also, was it Hinduism or Hindutva? Why can't we substitute the word or with and? Simply change the Boolean gate. It can be Hinduism and Hindutva. Thank you, sir.
He's saying, why Hinduism or Hindutva? Why not Hinduism and Hindutva?
But I said it very clearly. I am not bothered without customary usage. I am making the simple point. Etymologically, ism suggests a dogma. That's the point I'm making. That's the reason I'm against the word.
Okay.
Nothing to do with what Shashi said or his contemporary usage.
My last question before we end. Both of us are souls ensconced in this body with this mind. All here are souls here. They have various bodies. We are talking. At which moment does the two bodies talking become a deeper engagement of two souls?
Are we answering that question or am I answering your question?
Haven't you answered that question? You already.
No.
He hasn't asked the question.
Okay. So my response to what you are saying is, one would have to define who's the I. And when you define who's the I, you would have to use I in the lower case. Once you use the word I in the lower case, and once you define the I, quite often you will find that there is no need for actual articulation of words. The communication happens without usage of words. Empirical, test it out.
Thank you very much, Bibek. I think it's been one of the most enriching conversations I've had. Thank you very much.
Thank you.